When we go into defensiveness, we are not protecting the relationship. We're not even protecting ourselves. What we are protecting ourselves on is the fear of not being worthy and the fear of not being enough. Lashing out is less about confidence, I should say, and more about fear. The fear of failure, the fear of being shamed or rejected. Vulnerability is the birthplace of connection. Now, if you were to couple that with vulnerability with willingness to own our parts, to take responsibility. Now, this is the antidote to defensiveness. Now, this can literally transform how we relate to our friends, our family, our colleagues, our partner, and we're going to free ourselves from the constant entrapment that happens with defensiveness.
Welcome to the High Performing Warrior Podcast. My name is Nero Dowell and I'll be your host in this journey. And over the last 10 years, I've been working with leaders, with couples, with spiritual seekers, men and women all over the world, helping them achieve the same transformation, win the war that exists inside of us, to gain more clarity, more purpose, more certainty, and to finally step into a world of mental peace and emotional freedom. These podcasts is only a glimpse of the full high-performing warrior training. In these podcasts, you will hear references to the coaches that I have internally. You will hear references to modules and missions. Now, these references or instructions are for the internal tribe, the souls that are participating within the warrior training. And for the listeners, you feel that I'm actually coaching you myself. It's important to me that even though this is a glimpse of the full training, you get an authentic experience. I hope that this episode creates a shift inside of you, even if it's just a little one, just enough to see this world through a new set of eyes, through the eyes of an awakened mind. Because the truth is, your greatest battle is not out there, it's inside of you. And when you face it, when you do the inner work, you don't just survive, you rise.
Guys, today's transmission is such an important one, especially for those of you, it's important for everyone, but especially for those of you that are in a relationship, going to be in a relationship, looking to invest in a relationship, or this could be, it doesn't have to be with a partner necessarily. This could be a relationship with a friend, a close relationship with a boss. It could be anything along those lines. So today's one is on two topics that I think is highly, highly, highly relevant, which is defensiveness and burnout, right? Defensiveness in relationships, in communication, in conflict, and the second one being the burnout. Okay, so right now we're spending a bit of time and effort focusing on the character part of this journey, this high-performing warrior journey. Now, if you're in a relationship with someone and, when you're getting feedback, when you're stepping into realms where you need to talk about difficult situations, talk about your relationship, and if you're always getting defensive, now that's actually part of your character. See, the defensiveness trait that often shows up in communications and relationship is an indicator that the character work needs a lot of work. It's an indicator that your character is underdeveloped. Now, we're going to be exploring this in much more detail as we go on. But anything that we repeat, any behavior that we repeat on a consistent basis becomes part of our character. So in communication stance, when we are communicating our needs, or if our partner's communicating our needs, wants, desires, concerns, and if we start getting defensive, then the character that your partner's with is with a defensive person. Likewise, burnout. Now, burnout often happens when, burnout is a silent process, right? Exhaustion is a silent process. Now, when we've hit burnout is because we haven't been paying attention to the thousands of signs that have been coming to us over a period of time, right? And so that is a lack of self-awareness. Again, falls into character. So I want you to think and remember of a time where you may have caught yourself snapping at a loved one, your partner, children, etc., or feeling a urgent need to defend yourself, right? In the minute, like, hey, hang on, you don't understand. Now, it's almost like your body has switched a switch, right? It's gone into this different mode, and your pulse, your heart rate starts beating fast, and it's as if you're about to brace for impact. And what ends up happening is that you react from harsh words. Now, if you've ever been there, I've got to say you're not alone. Defensiveness can creep up in every single one of our lives in a very subtle way. It chips out on our relationship and even fueling a sense of exhaustion that we call burnout. See, the reason why I'm bringing burnout into this conversation of defensiveness and relationship is sometimes, right, it's not the relationship that's an issue. It's not the conflict that's an issue. What ends up happening is that we have hit this state of burnout and we've got nothing left in the gas. And what ends up happening is that, our partner has needs, our children has needs, our employees have needs, our bosses have needs. And what we are subconsciously saying is that you don't understand what I'm feeling. In hell, I don't even understand what I'm feeling. And so I'm just going to defend whatever you're saying, whatever crucial information you're giving me, I'm just going to defend the hell out of it. So today we're going to explore why defensiveness happens, how it's linked to our childhood experiences and attachments, and also how it relates into burnout. We'll cover some research-backed strategies that's going to help you break free from this damaging cycle of burnout, damaging cycle of defensiveness, so that you can approach your relationship, your life, with a sense of calm and confidence rather than a place of misunderstanding. So I want you to stay with me here, because if you can spot the triggers that make you defensive, you may just as well find the key in reclaiming not only your emotional well-being, but also your energy and your passion for life. So let's begin by mapping out the defensiveness cycle. Now, it's a simple way to understand how we move from a state of feeling safe and steady, and all of a sudden we are tense and reactive. So I want you to picture a roundabout on the road, right? You're driving along peacefully, minding your own business, and all of a sudden another car cuts off on you, right? In the roundabout, right? Your heart's racing. And before you can even think, you hit the horn or you yell out the window. So hitting the horn and yelling out is what we're calling here is defensiveness. We see a threat, we react. We see a threat and we react. And when we react harshly. And the reason why we react is to protect ourselves. See, this process is actually hard-rooted in our body's survival system. Now, when we feel criticized, when we feel judged, the amygdala, the part of our brain that is ignited when we are threatened, lights up. And it triggers the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. And maybe you know this part really, really well, right? It's the sudden sudden clench of your gut, right? The tension in your shoulders, right? It's like, what's it called? It feels that your body feels like it's kind of contracting. And even when the feedback is coming your way, and it's a positive feedback, it's a respectful feedback, it's a well-needed feedback, you can interpret feedback as a form of threat to your identity or your self-worth. So what do? We lash out, we shut down, we change the subject. All of these are classical defensiveness moves. But here's the question. What if these reactions are actually from your earliest childhood experience? See, there was research that was done by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. Now, these were the creators of the attachment theory. And they tell us that in childhood, we form attachment styles based on how consistent our caregivers' response in order to fulfill our need, right? So how consistently do our parents, mother or father, right, respond to our needs? Now, for example, if you grew up in an environment where you felt loved, right, on a consistent basis, let me say that again. If you grew up in an environment where you felt that the adults in your life was unpredictable. Now, we all have shit that is going on. Now, they probably weren't bad parents, but they just got shit going on. But as a child, you're not going to know that, okay? And so what ends up happening is that you interpret your parents as unpredictable, right? That love is conditional, right? What ends up happening is that you become hyper vigilant to perceive rejection and criticism. Now, your parents are like these parents could be, overloaded with financial issues, about to lose their job, right? May have relationship issues, but the child interprets it as, well, inconsistency, right? The child interprets it not as inconsistency. The inconsistent love, attention, care, right, safety that you're providing, right, is now perceived as rejection or criticism. Now, as this child becomes an adult, even the smallest comment can make the child feels like it's a threat, right? And this child's going to be rejected, abandoned, right? And that now sparks a form of defensiveness. Dr. Brené Brown, who's done a lot of research on shame and vulnerability. And one of the things that she found is that a fear of not being worthy or not enough is what feeds defensiveness. Now, I'll say that again. The fear, not the actual worthiness, the fear of not being worthy, not being enough, feeds defensiveness. Now, let's talk about, men and women, right? If the criticism or the feedback, I should say, right, that the man is experiencing is triggering off his lack of worthiness, he triggers off his lack of worthiness of being a man, not good enough to be a husband, provider, whatever. This instantly feeds off into his defensiveness. Now, here's the thing about defensiveness, guys. When you're in the peak of defensiveness, it's like it's a car crash that is currently happening. When you're in defensiveness, there's nothing that you can do other than either take a step back and try to get out of that situation, but you won't even have the sense to take a step back and get out of that situation because you're in the middle of a car crash, right? Now, a lot of today's conversation is going to be about how do we stop ourselves, before the car crash happens. That's the key when it comes to defensiveness. See, we rather put up walls, right, or shift blame than admit that there's any fault that comes from ourselves, because we're trying to protect the fear of not being worthy. We're trying to protect the fear of not being enough. Now, this is how the defensiveness cycle just continues, right? It's a perceived threat, and it hits an unresolved wound as a child. It triggers shame and fear, and as a result, triggers our fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, right? And all of this is really, it's not to attack the other person, but it's more so to protect ourselves from further hurt. So as I said, in the immediate moment, right, as the car crash is happening, it might feel safe, right, to go defensive because we are protecting not the relationship, right? When we go into defensiveness, we are not protecting the relationship. We're not even protecting ourselves. What we are protecting ourselves on, right, is the fear of not being worthy and the fear of not being enough, right? And your worthiness and your not enoughness is not part of your identity, but we think it is. So in that moment, as a car crash is happening, your relationship is not a priority, right? Your mental health is not even a priority, right? When that defensiveness cycle is happening, what the priority is protecting the fear of not being worthy, the fear of not being enough. Now let this land. This is massive because this, in the immediate moment, even though the defensiveness behavior may feel safe, it comes to a cost to our relationship. And if you've got children, it comes to a cost to the children, right? And it also comes to a cost to our mental health. Now, I want to really help understand how this cycle works and how it drains us. So I want you to think of this example of two couples. Let's call one John or Joseph and the other one Mary, right? Joseph comes back from work exhausted after a painful, grueling work week. And because he's exhausted, because he's in low energy, because he's given at work at the best of his ability, he comes back and he snaps at Mary, okay, for something very small, like not forgetting, why did you forget to get the grocery? Now, Mary, she feels the sting of criticism, probably because of his tone, right? Probably because of the way he said it, which triggered some potential childhood memories, and she fires back. Is don't blame me. You're the one who didn't remind me. And if you reminded me, I would have got it. Now, within seconds, right? Now, Joe comes back and he's like, you know how much stuff I have to do for other people? Do you think I have to remind you? And then this conversation now becomes a verbal ping pong debate, right? Really attacking each other. It's no longer about what's happening here. It's really coming in the sense of winning the argument, protecting their own self-worth, their own fear. Now, Joe's coming from a place of, I want to be respected for the sacrifice that I do from work, potentially, let's say. And Mary's coming from a place, let's say, that, hey, this is teamwork, right? I'm not your servant, okay? Now, even though their intentions may be noble, their behaviors are very reactive, defensive. Now, what started off as a small annoyance, right, has now turned out to be a big argument because none of them feel emotionally understood, emotionally safe. Joe is stressed out, on the edge of burnout. And by the way, if you are at the level of burnout or exhaustion, guess who cops it? Your relationship, your children, any ship, your leadership, any ship that is closest to you, right? And so Joe is burnt out, right? And he lacks the emotional reserves, not emotional tension, intelligence, right? Let's say Joe's a highly emotionally intelligent guy. But what's happened is that he hasn't got the emotional strength, the emotional reserves to handle a small issue calmly with clarity, right? And as a result, now Mary, she feels blamed and shamed. She becomes defensive. Her amygdala is hijacked, right? Even though, she may have not gone to work that day or whatever it is that's happened, right? Because of the exhaustion from Joe, right? Now her amygdala is hijacked and they both need to protect their wounds. And they've totally forgotten about the relationship. That's what I'm saying, the car crash, right? There's nothing you can do when you're in the heat of that moment. Ideally, step away. If you have the sense that you know that this is defensiveness, right? Ideally, step away. Now, if you cannot, right, then you just got to wait till the car crash is finished. Now, let's talk about a work setting, right? So imagine there's this lady called Sarah, right? Now, she's a dedicated employee, right, who's also on the brink of burnout. Now, her manager provides some crucial and, valuable feedback, constructive feedback, without actually criticizing or demeaning her, right? So the manager's given some feedback and on a recent project, and instantly what Sarah does is feels like she's at a personal attack. The inner critic in her head is saying things like, how dare they say that? Can't they see, right, that how much I'm doing for the company, how many nights I've invested, right? Her late hours, and she just walks away feeling even more drained, feeling misunderstood, feeling disrespected, even though none of those things was present in that meeting with the manager. But because of that, the relationship with her manager deteriorates. Trust erodes. And now this this relentless cycle of stress and defensiveness intensifies. And what ends up happening is that she's now disengaged in the workplace. See, these examples that I've just provided here, they highlight the key truth behind defensiveness and burnout and how they feed each other. So when we are burnt out physically, emotionally, depleted, it's far easier to misread someone's tone and their intentions as something as hostile. And at the same time, the more defensive we become, the more the conflict just goes out of control, like the car crash, right? And what ends up happening, it further depletes on your already limited and depleted energy in the first place, right? And now this cycle becomes a loop, right? The cycle becomes a loop. And what ends up happening because of this burnout, because of this defensiveness, now there's more resentment within the relationship, right? Now, even though you're still coming from the purest intention to be understood, to respect and to feel respected, to be heard, like you're coming from the purest intention, but you're exhausted and your wounds haven't even been addressed, right? Your unworthiness wounds haven't been addressed, and what the cycle is still continuing, draining all of those, right? So the common mistakes and misconception is believing that defensiveness is a fixed personality trait, and it's not. It's something that you can and need to change. And the truth is, defensiveness is a learnt behavior, right? And this is rooted in our life experiences. Now, if you have learnt from your childhood or throughout your life that if you've learnt to survive by pushing people away or shutting down at the first sign of criticism, now this can be a habit that can be rewired. The second mistakes that I see a lot of people make is that, this whole culture behind burnout is inevitable and it's a part of modern life. I've seen a lot of businessmen and women hit burnout, right? Get exhausted. And what they end up doing, and they take some time off, and sometimes it's 6 months to a year in order to recover. And they come back into a business or they start a new business, and they're always worried about not burning out, right? So there's two ends of the coin, right? Like everyone's exhausted these days, right? I'm seeing this, I'm hearing this all the time. Like, you go out for barbecue and say, oh, how you been? Oh man, just been busy. And you can see it. Especially if you've got kids and a high paying role or high demanding role, I should say, right? You can see it in their face. You can see it in their energy. They just look exhausted. And we're living in the era that, that exhaustion is an inevitable part of life, of modern life. And this is a mistake. That mindset is what keeps us in a defensiveness and burnout cycle that is continuously rolling. Another mistake is confusing aggressiveness and loud reaction, like yelling, with strength. Just because you lash out is not about being confident. Lashing out is less about confidence, I should say, and more about fear. The fear of failure, the fear of being shamed or rejected. There was a research that was done by John Gottman that highlights that defensiveness is one of the behaviors that he uses to predict divorce with a 95% accuracy. 95% accuracy. This is crazy. Defensiveness is one of those behaviors, those habits that he uses to predict divorce. The reason behind that, I should say, right, is that it blocks genuine communication. Now, if Joe comes back home and, just says, oh, babe, I'm just sorry for going on about the groceries, right? The truth is, I've just been really exhausted at work. It's been late nights. I haven't had time with the kids. I haven't had time with you. And, I just wanted some order at home. And I was looking to pass on fault instead of actually, taking ownership for my own stuff, right? So if he had that conversation, now I guarantee you, Mary would have felt a lot more safer, right? Mary wouldn't have reacted in the way that she reacted. If we're never open to hearing feedback, like genuine feedback, we will stay stuck in our own mental loops continuously fueling stress and resentment. Now, these are two main ingredients, stress and resentment, that feeds into burnout. So the good news is that realizing defensiveness is a very proactive strategy. Now, if you know that defensiveness is part of your character trait, the first step can be working towards letting this out. Brené Brown works on shame resilience. She talks about shame resilience and how it has become crucial, right, in order to really progress in relationships, leaderships, where vulnerability and owning our part in conflict. Now, this is terrifying, right? This can feel terrifying, owning our behaviors, feeling vulnerable, because when we go into ownership, there's a sense of vulnerability because initially there's a sense of vulnerability. And vulnerability is not weakness, guys. Vulnerability is this higher level of strength, right? And we cannot do ownership without vulnerability. Now, vulnerability is not the same as victimhood, talking about your problems and stuff like that. But in order to step into ownership, there has to be a vulnerability. Now, think of ownership and vulnerability as like you're building a new muscle. Just as you would go into the gym and lift weights, on your first day at the gym, you're probably going to suck at it. And, overnight, you're going to be, or the next day, you're going to feel a bit heavy. Even though you went to the gym, you're going to feel some muscle pains. But that's the same thing. When you first try out ownership and vulnerability, it's going to sting, right? And straight away, you may not be able to take ownership for, all the crappy things that you've done, but it is something that you build up to. So with consistent practice, where you can actually pause and be open and reflect. Now, this will gradually shape how you handle perceived threats. It will reduce your defensiveness. It will save your emotional energy and cut you off from potential burnouts. So what are the strategies? And let's talk about it. Let's talk about concrete steps, right, that will help you get out of this defensiveness cycle, this burnout cycle. Now, the first and the most important one, and without this first one, nothing's going to work, is awareness. First of all, you've got to bring awareness that, okay, cool, defensiveness is part of my character, right? When there's conflict, when there's feedback, I become quite defensive. Now, if that's cool. Now, that's the first level of awareness. The second level of awareness is being aware of the moment before you click over to defensiveness. So, it's mostly the same for all of us, right? But, it may vary a little. There needs to be a certain level of awareness that you notice this rush of heat, right? That tightness in your gut. And when you feel it, boom, say it out loud. I feel defensive, okay? Simply by naming what you are feeling, it gives you enough distance to choose a different, a responsive behavior rather than the reactive behavior. Now, as we've spoken about this 1,000 times, resilience is the ability to separate your emotions from your behavior. So when you're feeling this heat, this gut, this tension that is going into your head, pause. I feel defensive. Name it. And then this is what I do, right? I count to 20. Now, this gives two things, right? This, first of all, allows us we won't go to homeostasis in 20 breaths, but this allows us to gain control, right, of our thoughts, of our reactive behavior. And it allows the other person to speak, right, what's been weighing on their mind. So you're just counting to 20, right, in your head, right? Because when we are not counting to 20, our mind is not just fixated on what's happening here in this moment. There's a part of our mind that goes back into the past of when our wounds were created. When we are counting to 20 in the moment, pausing, breathing, staying silent, counting to 20. Guess what, guys? You can't count to 20 in the past. You can only count to 20 in the present moment. So what you are doing is blocking yourself from going into your past triggers, right? And just deal with the situation that's here. Now, if your partner's talking to you in a manipulative or condescending tone, count to 20, right? Now, if they're still talking, right, as you're counting to 20, count to another 20, okay? Now, the next thing, step 2 here, right? Step 1 is awareness. Step 2, right, is name it. Step 3, so name it. So say I feel defensive. Step 3 is count to 20. Step 4 is lead with curiosity. So instead of firing back with you always do this and you always do this and you haven't done this, right? Could you explain what you mean, right? Can you give me examples? Oh, this is interesting because how I view this is different. So by using the word, this is interesting, you're already sparking a sense of curiosity, right? And you're also relaxing that person because it's not a form of attack. See, a big part of Gottman's research on defensiveness is that the key to diffuse defensiveness in ourselves and our partner is actually taking responsibility. Saying things like, I see how my tone may have come across harshly. I'm sorry. In an argument, it's never one person's fault. In a relationship, it's never one person's fault. It's both of ours. And the moment that we demonstrate behaviors of taking responsibility, owning our shit. Now, this will also feed into the partner, not straight away, but after a period of time. But we have to take responsibility and we have to be consistent in that responsibility. Now, let's talk about strategies in addressing burnout. Now, the first part of it is really setting boundaries about what's leaking your energy, right? What is leaking your energy? Now, you might say, oh, my relationship is leaking my energy, right? My work is leaking my energy. It's really drawing out of me. Okay, cool. So my next question here is what else is leaking your energy that you can actually delegate, get rid of? What is it that is leaking your energy? The next question in the space of burnout, that we need to step into is, where are you recreating energy? What are you doing to, renew your energy? Are you doom scrolling? That's not going to help, right? Are you, watching porn, taking drugs, drinking? What are you doing to really, focus on new energy in? So the first stage is resetting boundaries. What's taking away my energy? And out of these 10 things that is taking away my energy, maybe 6 of them, there's nothing you can do, right? Kids are taking my energy. My job is taking my energy. My partner's there's nothing you can do about that right now. And if you do something, it's going to be a life-altering situation that, most likely doesn't need that. If you had more emotional space, more energy, mental clarity, you'll probably be able to deal with those situations with ease and comfort. So what else is leaking? What micro behaviors are you doing that is drawing your energy away? The second thing is, what are you doing to refill your energy? Are you scheduling time for exercising, journaling? Are you scheduling time to go for walks, to replenish your emotional tank? See, when your emotional tank isn't running on fumes, you will find more resilience, right? You'll be more likely not to snap in defensive mode. So I want you to remember this, guys. Each time you recognize your defensive trigger and choose curiosity, you're essentially freeing yourself from a lifelong script, right? You're freeing yourself from this stuckness. You're freeing yourself from this character who does not take ownership or responsibility, this character that's always burnt out, this character that is continually failing at relationships. So when you lead with curiosity, you're transforming your relationship from battlegrounds that it is into a safe haven. And that's where true connection grows. See, natural questions that I get is, does letting down my guard mean that I'll be walked over? And no, the work that we're doing here is the evolution of your character. Now, if you feel that you need to be someone that is continuously having guards on, right? Well, very likely no relationship is going to succeed. It's exhausting. Like, think about it, guys. If you were walking around with a knight armor, those big knight metal armors, imagine going to the bathroom with that thing. Imagine walking to the bus stop or going for a lunch date on that. Man, like, your body is going to be exhausted. Now, you're not going to get walked over. And sometimes you might. People will sometimes take advantage. But other than those times, right, because you're displaying healthy vulnerability, right, you're taking ownership, because you're demonstrating those behaviors and it's now part of who you are as a person, okay? That character is then going to manifest for emotionally, mentally, spiritually, relationshiply. So you'll be in a place where you are open and receptive to feedback while still managing strong boundaries. So I want to end this conversation by asking you to imagine a different version of yourself. Someone who is able to face criticism or conflict, and it doesn't get them to react from a place of lash out, but rather, I should say, pauses, brings awareness, breathes, listens, takes ownership and responsibility, and speaks truthfully without shame. I want you to visualize stepping away from arguments, feeling stronger in yourself and also your relationship. See, this reality isn't just for a lucky few. It's available to every single one of us that is willing to pull back the layers of our old habits and layers of our fears. As Brené Brown's famous notes, vulnerability is the birthplace of connection. Now, if you were to couple that with vulnerability with willingness to own our parts, to take responsibility. Now, this is the antidote to defensiveness. Now, this can literally transform how we relate to our friends, our family, our colleagues, our partner, and we're going to free ourselves from the constant entrapment that happens with defensiveness. Now, guys, remember, change doesn't require perfection. It just requires progression, right? Each time you choose to be open, instead of bringing in the armor, you invest in your relationship, in your leadership, in your mental health. And each time you protect your energy and practice self-care, what ends up happening is that you reject the darkness that comes with burnout. My hope for every single one of you is that you leave here today inspired to notice the subtle clues in your body, in your thoughts, to pause before reacting, and to choose curiosity over defensiveness. If you do, you will not only mend your relationships, but you'll also invite a sense of calmness and clarity into your everyday life. As children, we used to do everything with curiosity. What's this thing? Let's put it in our mouth, right? What happens if I put my finger in there? But, those are interesting things for those of your parents. But as a child, learning, growing, connecting, we used to use curiosity for everything. So guys, thank you for joining me in this journey. Thank you for joining me in this conversation. Let's leave this conversation knowing that it's okay to let down your shield, to nurture the bonds, the roots, to nurture trust, and to really put your priority on your relationships rather than protecting the wounds of our fears, of our worthiness, of our not enough. Thank you. Bye for now.
I hope this episode really spoke to you. And if it did, don't just keep it to yourself. Share it with at least one person who you know that needs to hear this today. And more than that, talk about it. Have a connecting conversation about it. Because growth doesn't just happen by listening to it. It happens through reflection, challenge, and action. And if you're ready to take this deeper, to end the battles that are happening inside of you, to step into clarity, courage, and the peace of a warrior, then let's talk. Click on the link below or jump into www.unconventional.com.au. Unconventional spelled with a K, not a C. Book in a time, a free call, and let's have a conversation if this journey is right for you. There's absolutely no pressure to join. This is just a conversation to see how the warrior training can help you waken your gifts, your purpose, to overcome your limitations and fears. Until next time, keep doing the inner work. This world, this universe needs you and the greatness that's inside of you.